last video, we discussed the federal courts, and in this video, which will be short, we'll be discussing the New York State courts. Now, New York courts are an interesting court system. It's historical, and if you study the New York courts, then you'll see that how it's organized. The highest court in New York is called not the New York Supreme Court, but the New York Court of Appeals. The highest trial court in New York is called the New York Supreme Court. The New York courts are more closely based on the English system of courts because most people forget that during the Revolutionary War, New York City was occupied by the British during the whole war. And during this period, we established New York City got rich because the British did all their trade through New York City and created what we now call Wall Street. As I told you, the highest court in New York is the New York Court of Appeals. Now, we told you that the federal courts are organized by circuits. The New York courts are organized by what are called judicial departments, of which there is 4. Judicial departments are composed of cities, towns, villages, and there are 4. New York and Brooklyn and Queens, all the 5 boroughs of New York City are in the 1st and 2nd judicial department. New York courts are courts of limited jurisdiction. They are limited geographically, meaning where they sit, and they're limited monetarily, how much they can hear a case for. As I told you, the highest court in New York is the New York Court of Appeals. Judges on this court serve fixed terms, not life terms, fixed terms. They are appointed by the governor with the advice and consent of the New York State Senate. The second highest court in New York is called the Appellate Division. The Appellate Division is an appellate court, and its members hear cases from the trial court. 4 judicial departments, 4 appellate divisions. The next highest court in New York only applies to the 5 boroughs of New York City and parts of surrounding areas. It's called the appellate term. The appellate term exists because there's so many cases from New York City, the appellate term could not hear them all. The appellate division, could not hear them all. So we created what is called the appellate term. The next court, which doesn't exist in New York City, is called the county court. And as New York is organized around counties, there's a county court in every county except the 5 boroughs of New York City, which are in fact 5 counties. The next courts are the trial court. The highest trial court in New York State is the New York Supreme Court. Now remember, in most states, the highest court in the state is called the State Supreme Court. But in New York, the highest court in the state is the Court of Appeals, and the New York State Supreme Court is the highest trial court in New York State. It has statewide jurisdiction. It can hear any case regardless of amount, and it hears all felony cases in the state. The next highest trial court is called the county court. And the county court is not in New York City. There are 57 county courts across the state. They have limited jurisdiction, and they may only hear cases up to a certain amount. They also can hear criminal cases. Now, we do not have a county court in New York, but our equivalent is called the New York City Civil Court. And the New York City Civil Court is only in New York City. Unlike the county court, it has no criminal jurisdiction. It hears civil cases only. For criminal cases in New York that are non-felony, we have what is called the New York City Criminal Court, and that exists only in New York City. Our next trial court is called the New York District Court. But the New York District Court only exists in two counties in the state, Nassau and Suffolk. It has both civil and limited criminal jurisdiction. Our next courts are called town courts and what we call the justice courts. There's no justice court in New York City. They're usually mostly upstate. They have limited jurisdiction over certain criminal matters. But what's most important about the justice court is that the justice court, to be a judge on the justice court, you're not required to be a lawyer. It is the only court in the state where a judge can be made a judge without being a lawyer. Now, let's take each court and let's start with the New York Court of Appeals. The New York Court of Appeals is the highest court in the state, and it's the court of last resort for most cases. It is generally the ultimate authority of questions of law in New York State. Although a few cases involving questions of federal law or the United States Constitution eventually may be taken to the United States Supreme Court, these are rare. The Court of Appeals hears both civil and criminal appeals. The court, which convenes in Albany, consists of 6 associate judges and a chief judge who serves as chief judicial officer of the unified court system. All judges of this court are appointed by the governor with the advice and consent of the state senate from a list prepared by a nonpartisan, meaning it's not political, nominating committee. Appeals in civil cases must be first heard in one of the appellate divisions of the state Supreme Court before taken to the Court of Appeals. However, cases involving only questions of a statute's constitutionality may go directly to the Court of Appeals from the trial court. Criminal cases must be appealed to the appellate division or the appellate term before it may be brought before the Court of Appeals. In addition to hearing appeals, the Court of Appeals is responsible for determining policy for the administration of the New York court system and adopting rules that admits attorneys. The next is the appellate division of the Supreme Court, the second highest court. Okay? The appellate division of the Supreme Court is an intermediate appellate court of the state. It hears civil and criminal appeals, reviewing the record established at trial in lower courts. The appellate division is divided geographically into 4 departments throughout the state. Each department is responsible for hearing appeals from the court within its geographical area. Justices of the appellate division are appointed by the governor from among those who are Supreme Court justices. Departments vary between 4 and 5 justices depending on the caseload. Each department is responsible for the admitting and practice of attorneys. The third highest court is called the appellate term, okay? But the appellate term only exists in the first and second judicial departments. As I told you, it exists to help carry the load for the appellate division. Our next case, the trial court, is called the Supreme Court. The New York Supreme Court is the statewide trial court with the broadest jurisdiction, both criminal and civil. It can hear virtually any type of case brought before it, with the exceptions of claims, financial claims, against the state, which must be brought into another court, which we will discuss. The Supreme Court has practically unlimited jurisdiction, and it makes its caseload correspondingly heavier than that of the other courts. One area in which the Supreme Court, New York, must be involved is proceedings to end marriage, because it's the only court in the state that can grant a divorce. As noted, judges on the Supreme Court are appointed for fixed terms. They are elected, some are elected, and they are elected or appointed for 14-year terms. The next court is the county court. A county court exists in each county of the state outside of New York City. Judges are elected for 10-year terms, with the number of judges varying according to population. County court judges preside over both criminal and civil cases. Although the county court's jurisdiction over criminal matters is almost unlimited, as is the Supreme Court, its jurisdiction in civil cases is more restricted. Money claims in this court cannot exceed $25,000. New York City does not have a county court, and we have what is called the New York City Civil Court. The New York City Civil Court hears civil cases in the city of New York involving amounts up to $25,000, exclusive of interest and cost. It also includes a small claims part and hears disputes between landlords and tenants. Does not have general jurisdiction in equitable matters, but has unlimited jurisdiction in efforts to recover real property located in New York City. Our next court is the Justice Court. Justice courts can hear both criminal and civil cases, but their jurisdiction in both instances is severely limited. In criminal matters, justice courts can only try misdemeanor traffic cases and minor violations and conduct preliminary proceedings, which are called arraignments, for felony cases. In civil case matters, justice courts have a limited amount that they can hear a case for, except for questions of rent. Justice courts cannot decide issues of ownership of real property. Now, New York has what is called special purpose courts. The number one special purpose court is called the family court. And the family court hears cases involving family disputes, child custody, determines support payments for families, can handle adoptions, and may determine the parentage or parentage of a child in paternity proceedings. Our next one is called our special purpose court, New York. It's called the surrogates court. We lawyers called it the court of the dead. The surrogates court handles matters involving deceased persons and guardianships. Judges in this court are elected in each county for terms of 10 years, but judges in New York on this court are for 14 years. Matters include the probate of wills, the appointment and control of executors, administrators, and trustees. It can handle adoptions and the final disposition of estates. Our next special purpose court is called the New York Court of Claims. The New York Court of Claims hears disputes, hears cases involving financial claims against the state of New York. If you want to sue the state of New York for money damages, you must sue in the New York Court of Claims. Now, the New York City criminal courts, as I told you, and the district courts. Now, it's important to understand that New York courts have existed since the 1600s. Courts have a rich history and a rich tradition. It's important that you study the courts because through the courts is where most of the change in this country is made. Many people don't understand how much authority and power we give to the courts. We give this authority and power to the courts because we believe that the courts is the best way to solve and resolve disputes between citizens and their government. So we've made it clear how important the courts are, but I urge you as well to read chapter 3 in your text. It deals with alternatives to the judicial system, and it's a discussion of the importance of international law. If you remember, I told you that treaties once signed by the United States become part of our law. So please make sure you read judicial alternatives and dispute resolutions. Read the court systems. Please be prepared for our next video and continue to read your textbook.